The Legacy by Virginia Woolf, Part 3. It's the finale. He took up another volume and opened it at random. What a coward I am! I let the chance slip again. But it seemed selfish to bother him with my own affairs when he has so much to think about. And we so seldom have an evening alone. What was the meaning of that? Oh, here was the explanation. It referred to her work in the East End. I plucked up courage and talked to Gilbert at last. He was so kind, so good. He made no objection. He remembered that conversation. She had told him that she felt so idle, so useless. She wished to have some work of her own. She wanted to do something. She had blushed so prettily, he remembered, as she said it, sitting in that very chair, to help others. He had bantered her a little. Hadn't she enough to do looking after him, after her home? Still, if it amused her, of course he had no objection. What was it? Some district, some committee? Only she must promise not to make herself ill. So it seemed that every Wednesday she went to Whitechapel. He remembered how he hated the clothes she wore on those occasions, but she had taken it very seriously, it seemed. The diary was full of references like this. Saw Mrs. Jones. She has 10 children. Husband lost his arms in an accident. Did my best to find a job for Lily. He skipped on. His own name occurred less frequently. His interest slackened. Some of the entries conveyed nothing to him. For example, I had a heated argument about socialism with BM. Who was BM? He could not feel the initials. Some woman, he supposed, that she had met on one of her committees. BM made a violent attack upon the upper classes. I walked back after the meeting with BM and tried to convince him, but he's so narrow-minded. So BM was a man, no doubt one of those intellectuals, as they call themselves, who was so violent, as Angela said, and so narrow-minded. She had invited him to come and see her, apparently. BM came to dinner. He shook hands with Minnie. That note of exclamation gave another twist to his mental picture. BM, it seemed, wasn't used to parlor maids. He had shaken hands with Minnie. Presumably, he was one of those tame working men who air their views in ladies' drawing rooms. Gilbert knew the type and had no liking for this particular specimen, whoever BM might be. Here he was again. Went with BM to the Tower of London. He said revolution is bound to come. He said we live in a fool's paradise. That was just the kind of thing BM would say. Gilbert could hear him. He could also see him quite distinctly, a stubby little man with a rough beard, red tie, dressed as they always did in tweeds, who had never done an honest day's work in his life. Surely Angela had the sense to see through him. He read on. BM said some very disagreeable things about. The name was carefully scratched out. I told him I would not listen to any more abuse of. Again, the name was obliterated. Could it have been his own name? Was that why Angela covered the page so quickly when he came in? The thought added to his growing dislike of BM. He had had the impertinence to discuss him in this very room. Why had Angela never told him? It was very unlike her to conceal anything. She had been the soul of candor. He turned the pages, picking out every reference to BM. BM told me the story of his childhood. His mother went out charing. When I think of it, I can hardly bear to go on living such luxury. 3 guineas for one hat. If only she had discussed the matter with him instead of puzzling her poor little head about questions that were much too difficult for her to understand. He had lent her books. Karl Marx, The Coming Revolution. The initials BM recurred repeatedly. But why never the full name? There was an informality, an intimacy in the use of initials that was very unlike Angela. Had she called him BM to his face? He read on. BM came unexpectedly after dinner. Luckily, I was alone. That was only a year ago. Luckily? Why luckily? I was alone. Where had he been that night? He checked the date in his engagement book. It had been the night of the mansion house dinner, and BM and Angela had spent the evening alone. He tried to recall that evening. Was she waiting up for him when he came back? Had the room looked just as usual? Were there glasses on the table? Were the chairs drawn close together? He could remember nothing whatever. Nothing except his own speech at the mansion house dinner. It became more and more inexplicable to him, the whole situation, his wife receiving an unknown man alone. Perhaps the next volume would explain. Hastily, he reached for the last of the diaries, the one she had left unfinished when she died. There, on the very first page, was that cursed fellow again. Dined alone with BM. He became very agitated. He said it was time we understood each other. I tried to make him listen, but he would not. He threatened that if I did not, the rest of the page was scored over. She had written Egypt, Egypt, Egypt over the whole page. He could not make out a single word, but there would be only one interpretation. The scoundrel had asked her to become his mistress. Alone in his room, the blood rushed to Gilbert Clandon's face. He turned the pages rapidly. What had been her answer? Initials had ceased. It was simply he now. He came again. I told him I could not come to any decision. I implored him to leave me. He had forced himself upon her in this very house. Well, why hadn't she told him? How could she have hesitated for an instant? Then I wrote him a letter. Then pages were left blank. Then there was this. No answer to my letter. Then more blank pages. And then this. He has done what he threatened. After that, what came after that? He turned page after page. All were blank. But there, on the very day before her death, was this entry. Have I the courage to do it too? There was the end. Gilbert Clandon let the book slide to the floor. He could see her in front of him. She was standing on the curb in Piccadilly. Her eyes stared. Her fists were clenched. Here came the car. He could not bear it. He must know the truth. He strode to the telephone. Miss Miller! There was silence. Then he heard someone moving in the room. Cissy Miller speaking. Her voice at last answered him. Who, he thundered, is BM? He could hear the cheap clock ticking on her mantelpiece. Then a long-drawn sigh. Then at last she said, he was my brother. He was her brother who had killed himself. Is there, he heard Cissy Miller asking, anything that I can explain? Nothing, he cried. Nothing. He had received his legacy. She had told him the truth. She had stepped off the curb to rejoin her lover. She had stepped off the curb to escape from him. The end.